The plastic stick trembled in my hand, two pink lines staring back at me like accusatory eyes. After years of disappointment, this should have been a moment of joy. Instead, dread coiled in my stomach as I imagined Jake's reaction. "Alice, you've been in there for ages. What's going on?" Jake's impatient voice carried through the bathroom door. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Coming," I called, my voice surprisingly steady. Stepping into our bedroom, I found Jake sprawled across the bed, flicking through his phone. He barely glanced up. "Well, another negative?" I swallowed hard. "Actually, it's positive." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake's eyes snapped to mine, narrowing with suspicion. "What did you say?" "I'm pregnant, Jake. I held out the test, my hand shaking slightly. We're going to have a baby." Jake sat up slowly, his face a mask of disbelief. "That's impossible. We've been trying for years." "I know, but did you cheat on me?" The accusation hit me like a slap. "What? No, of course not." I recoiled, hurt and anger flaring inside me. "How could you even think that?" Jake stood, towering over me. "Well, it doesn't make sense, does it? All those fertility treatments, all that money wasted, and suddenly you're pregnant? It happens, Jake. Sometimes it just happens," he scoffed, pacing the room. "Right. And I'm supposed to believe that?" "Yes," I cried, frustration building. "Because it's the truth. This is our baby, Jake. Ours." Jake stopped, turning to face me with a cold look in his eyes. "I don't want it." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What?" I said. "I don't want it." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Get rid of it." I stumbled back, clutching the test to my chest. No, I won't do that." "Alice, be reasonable," Jake said, his tone patronizing. "We're not ready for this. Our marriage is already hanging by a thread." "Because of you," I shot back, finding my voice. "Because you've been distant and cruel, treating me like I'm broken just because I couldn't get pregnant." Jake's face darkened. "Watch it, Alice. You're getting hysterical." "No, I'm not," I said, straightening my spine. "I'm finally seeing things clearly. This baby is a miracle, Jake, and if you can't see that, then..." "Then what?" he challenged, stepping closer. I met his gaze, unflinching. "Then maybe we shouldn't be together anymore." Jake's laugh was harsh. "Oh, that's rich. You think you can make it on your own? With a baby?" "I'd rather be alone than with someone who doesn't want our child," I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. For a moment, something like regret flashed across Jake's face, but it was quickly replaced by a sneer. "Fine. Have your precious baby. But don't come crawling back when you realize how hard it is." He stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with the weight of his words. I sank onto the bed, one hand instinctively moving to my still flat stomach. The test was still clutched in my other hand, those two pink lines a promise of a future I'd dreamed of for so long. But not like this. Never like this. My phone buzzed, startling me. It was a text from my mother, Brenda. "How did it go, sweetheart? Did you tell him?" I stared at the message, tears finally spilling over. How could I tell her that my marriage had just imploded? That the man I thought I knew had revealed himself to be a monster? With shaking fingers, I typed out a reply. "Can I come home?" The response was immediate. "Of course. We're here for you, always." I looked around the room at the life Jake and I had built together. It all seemed hollow now, a facade hiding years of pain and resentment. But as I placed a hand on my stomach again, I felt a flicker of hope. This baby was my future now, and I would do whatever it took to give us both the life we deserved. The suitcase felt impossibly heavy as I dragged it down the stairs. Each step was a battle against gravity and my own doubts. Was I really doing this? Leaving everything I'd known for the past decade? "Where do you think you're going?" Jake's voice, cold and mocking, froze me in place. I turned, my hand instinctively moving to protect my stomach. "I'm leaving, Jake. I can't stay here anymore." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "And where exactly are you planning to go? Back to Mommy and Daddy?" The condescension in his tone sparked a fire in me. "Yes, actually. At least they'll support me and this baby." Jake's laugh was cruel. "Support you? Alice, you're 40 years old. You really think you can start over now? As a single mother?" I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze. "Watch me." For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered in Jake's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a sneer. "Fine, go, but don't come crawling back when you realize how hard it is out there." "I'd rather struggle alone than stay here with you," I shot back, surprised by my own vehemence. Jake's face darkened. He took a step towards me, and I instinctively backed away, bumping into the wall. "You ungrateful bitch," he hissed. "After everything I've done for you." "Done for me?" I interrupted, anger overriding my fear. "You mean like blaming me for our fertility issues? Treating me like I was broken? Making me feel worthless?" Jake's hand shot out, gripping my arm painfully. "I gave you everything, Alice. A home, a life. Let go of me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Now." For a tense moment, I thought he might hit me, but then he released me, stepping back with a look of disgust. "Get out, and don't bother trying to come back. You're on your own now." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my suitcase and headed for the door, my heart pounding. As I reached for the handle, Jake called out, "You'll regret this, Alice. You're nothing without me." I paused, turning to face him one last time. "No, Jake, I was nothing with you, but not anymore." With that, I stepped out into the crisp morning air, closing the door on 10 years of my life. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my phone, dialing my mother's number. "Alice?" Brenda's voice was thick with sleep. "Honey, what's wrong, Mom?" I choked out, tears finally spilling over. "Can you come get me? I left Jake." There was a sharp intake of breath. "Oh, sweetheart, of course. Your father and I will be there as soon as we can. Where are you?" I looked around, realizing I had no idea where to go. I'm still outside the house. I don't know where." "No," Brenda interrupted firmly. "Don't stay there. Go to the diner on Main Street. You remember Diane? She'll look after you until we get there." Relief washed over me. Okay, I can do that. We'll be there soon, Alice. I love you." "I love you too, Mom." As I ended the call, I noticed a curtain twitching in the upstairs window. Jake was watching me, his expression unreadable. I squared my shoulders and turned away, dragging my suitcase down the driveway. Each step felt like a small victory, carrying me further from the life I'd known and closer to an uncertain future. But as I walked, I felt a flutter in my stomach, so faint I might have imagined it. My hand moved to rest there, a small smile tugging at my lips despite everything. "It's just you and me now, little one," I whispered. "But we're going to be okay, I promise." As I rounded the corner, leaving my old life behind, I felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Whatever came next, I would face it head-on, for myself and for the tiny life growing inside me. The familiar creak of my childhood bedroom door jolted me awake. For a moment, I forgot where I was, panic rising in my throat. Then I saw my mother's silhouette in the doorway, and reality came crashing back. "Alice, honey, are you awake?" Brenda's voice was soft, tentative. I pushed myself up, wincing at the wave of nausea that hit me. "Yeah, Mom, I'm up." She stepped into the room, concern etched on her face. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," I admitted, managing a weak smile. "But I'll live." Brenda sat on the edge of the bed, her hand finding mine. "Your father's making breakfast. Think you can stomach some toast?" The thought of food made my stomach churn, but I nodded. "I'll try." As we made our way downstairs, the smell of coffee and bacon hit me like a wall. I stumbled, gripping the banister. "Alice?" My father's worried voice carried from the kitchen. "I'm okay," I called back, taking deep breaths. "Just morning sickness." I entered the kitchen to find my father, Michael, standing at the stove, spatula in hand. His eyes widened as he took in my appearance. "Good Lord, sweetheart, you look terrible." "Thanks, Dad," I said dryly, sinking into a chair. "Just what every woman wants to hear." He had the grace to look sheepish. "I'm sorry, Are you sure you're all right?" I nodded, accepting the glass of water my mother handed me. "I will be. It's just a lot to process." Michael turned off the stove, joining us at the table. For a moment we sat in uncomfortable silence. Then he cleared his throat. "Alice, we need to talk about what happens next." I tensed, bracing myself. "What do you mean?" "Well," he began, exchanging a glance with my mother, "you can't stay here forever. You need a plan." "Michael," Brenda warned, but he pressed on. "No, we need to address this. Alice, you're 40 years old. You're pregnant, unemployed, and, well, let's face it, you've been out of the workforce for years." Each word felt like a blow. I blinked back tears, anger rising to replace the hurt. "So what are you saying, Dad, that I should go crawling back to Jake?" "No," both my parents exclaimed in unison. "Of course not," Brenda said firmly. "But your father's right about one thing. We need a plan." I slumped in my chair, suddenly exhausted. "I know, I don't know where to start." Michael reached across the table, taking my hand. We'll figure it out together, sweetheart. But first things first, we need to get you to a doctor. The thought sent a jolt of panic through me. A doctor? Why? To make sure everything's okay with the baby, Brenda explained gently. And, well, to discuss your options. I recoiled, yanking my hand away. My options? You mean? Alice, Michael said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle, we just want to make sure you've considered everything. This isn't going to be easy. I know that, I snapped, pushing away from the table. But this baby is all I have left. I'm not giving it up. Brenda stood, approaching me cautiously. No one's asking you to, sweetheart. We just want to make sure you're prepared for what's ahead. I softened slightly, letting her pull me into a hug. I know, Mom. I'm scared, but I have to do this. As I pulled away, a sharp pain lanced through my abdomen. I gasped, doubling over. Alice? My father's voice sounded far away. What's wrong? I looked down, horror flooding through me at the sight of blood on my pajama pants. No, I whispered. No, no, no. The room spun as panic set in. My mother's arms were around me, her voice urgent in my ear. Michael, call an ambulance. As darkness crept in at the edges of my vision, one thought consumed me. I couldn't lose this baby. I couldn't lose the only good thing left in my life. The last thing I heard before unconsciousness claimed me was my father's frantic voice on the phone. Please hurry, my daughter. I think she's losing the baby. The first cry of my newborn son pierced the air, and with it, every doubt and fear I'd harbored over the past months evaporated. Tears streamed down my face as the nurse placed him in my arms, his tiny body warm against my chest. Hello, little one, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I'm your mom. My parents crowded around the hospital bed, their faces a mix of joy and relief. The journey here hadn't been easy. After the scare in my first trimester, every day had felt like a battle. Against my body, against the whispers of doubt, against the ghost of Jake's cruel words. But now, looking into my son's eyes, I knew it had all been worth it. He's beautiful, Alice, my mother said, wiping away her own tears. My father squeezed my shoulder. What are you going to name him? I smiled, running a finger along my son's cheek. Ethan, it means strong. As the days passed and we settled into a routine at my parents' house, the reality of single motherhood began to sink in. Sleepless nights blurred into exhausting days. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, constant and unyielding. One particularly rough morning after Ethan had been crying for hours, I found myself in the kitchen, desperately trying to warm a bottle with one hand while bouncing him in the other. Shh, please, Ethan, I begged, my own tears threatening to fall. Mommy's trying. Here, let me help. My mother's voice startled me. She took Ethan from my arms, cooing softly to him. I slumped against the counter, suddenly bone-weary. I can't do this, Mom. I'm not cut out for this. Brenda's eyes softened with understanding. Oh, sweetheart, every new mother feels that way sometimes. But you're stronger than you know. As if to prove her point, Ethan's cries quieted as she rocked him. I watched, a mix of gratitude and envy washing over me. I need to find a job, I said, the words tasting bitter. I can't keep relying on you and Dad. My mother nodded, her expression thoughtful. Actually, I might have an idea about that. Do you remember Diane from the diner? I frowned, vaguely recalling the kind-faced woman who'd sheltered me the day I left Jake. Sort of. Why? Well, I ran into her yesterday. She mentioned they're short-staffed at the diner. It's not much, but it's a start. Hope fluttered in my chest, quickly tempered by doubt. I don't know, Mom. I haven't worked in years. And what about Ethan? Your father and I can watch him while you're at work, she said firmly. Alice, this could be good for you, a chance to get back on your feet. I looked at my son, now sleeping peacefully in my mother's arms. The thought of leaving him, even for a few hours, made my heart ache. But I knew she was right. I needed to do this, for both of us. Okay, I said, taking a deep breath. I'll do it. The next day, I found myself standing outside the diner, Ethan strapped to my chest in a baby carrier. My hands shook as I reached for the door handle. You've got this, I whispered to myself, echoing my mother's words from that morning. As I stepped inside, the bell above the door chimed. Diane looked up from behind the counter, her face breaking into a warm smile. Alice, I'm so glad you came, she said, coming around to greet me. Her eyes softened as she noticed Ethan. And who's this handsome little man? I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. This is Ethan, my son. Diane's smile widened. Well, aren't you two a package deal? Come on back, let's talk about getting you started. As I followed her, I felt a strange mix of terror and excitement. This was it, the first step towards our new life. I had no idea what challenges lay ahead, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. With Ethan's warm weight against my chest and the promise of a fresh start before me, I squared my shoulders and stepped into the unknown. The diner's bell chimed, and I looked up from wiping down the counter, my customary greeting dying on my lips. There, framed in the doorway, stood Jake. My heart stuttered, then raced. He looked different, expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, a gleaming watch on his wrist. But his eyes, cold and calculating, were just as I remembered. Well, well, he drawled, sauntering in, if it isn't my runaway wife. I gripped the counter, willing my voice to remain steady. What are you doing here, Jake? He smirked, sliding onto a stool. Can a man visit his hometown? Although I must say, I'm surprised to find you here. His gaze swept dismissively over the diner. Before I could respond, a woman entered behind him. Tall, blonde, and impeccably dressed, she exuded an air of wealth and confidence. Jake's smirk widened. Alice, meet Nancy, my wife. The word hit me like a physical blow. Wife? How long had it been since I'd left? A year? 18 months? Nancy extended a manicured hand, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. So you're Alice. I've heard so much about you. I shook her hand, automatically, my mind reeling. I'm sorry, I didn't know Jake had remarried. Jake laughed, the sound grating on my nerves. Oh, there's a lot you don't know, Alice. For instance, did you know that while you were off playing house with Mommy and Daddy, I sold the company, made quite a tidy profit, too? The implications of his words sank in slowly. The company we'd built together, the one I'd walked away from when I left him, he'd sold it without a word to me. You had no right, I hissed, anger replacing shock. Jake's eyes hardened. I had every right. You abandoned everything, remember? Including your shares in the company. I opened my mouth to argue, but at that moment, Diane emerged from the kitchen, Ethan in her arms. Alice, honey, I think someone needs his mama. Jake's gaze snapped to my son, his expression unreadable. So this is the brat, huh? Doesn't look like much. Red clouded my vision. I snatched Ethan from Diane, cradling him protectively. Don't you dare talk about my son like that. Nancy laid a hand on Jake's arm, her smile brittle. Now, darling, let's not cause a scene. We just came to deliver the news, remember? Jake nodded, his smirk returning. Right you are, my dear. Alice, we thought you should know we're moving back to town. Bought that big house on Maple Street. You know the one. I did know it. It was the house I'd always dreamed of living in, back when Jake and I were trying to start a family. Why? I managed to choke out. Why come back here? Jake stood, adjusting his cufflinks. Let's just say I have some unfinished business to attend to. Oh, and Alice, you might want to have a chat with your lawyer. There are some discrepancies in our divorce settlement that need addressing. With that, he strode out, Nancy in tow. The bell chimed again, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. I slumped against the counter, my legs suddenly weak. Ethan whimpered, sensing my distress. Oh, honey, Diane said softly, coming around to support me. Are you okay? I shook my head, tears threatening to spill. I don't know. I thought I was finally free of him. As I held Ethan close, inhaling his sweet baby scent, a terrible realization dawned. Jake was back, and he clearly had an agenda. Whatever game he was playing, I was woefully unprepared. But looking down at my son, I knew I couldn't run again. This was our home now, our life. I'd fought too hard to build this new reality. Diane, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, can you watch Ethan for a bit? I need to make a call. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Of course, sweetie. Take all the time you need. As I stepped outside, phone in hand, I took a deep breath. I didn't know what Jake was planning, but one thing was clear. I needed to be ready. For Ethan's sake and for my own, I had to fight back. With trembling fingers, I dialed a number I never thought I'd use again. Hello, this is Alice Thompson. I need to speak to a lawyer. It's urgent. The manila envelope felt heavy in my hands, its contents threatening to upend my world once again. I'd been avoiding it for days, but with Jake's latest threat looming over me, I couldn't put it off any longer. Taking a deep breath, I opened it, spreading the documents across my kitchen table. As I read, my heart sank. Jake hadn't just sold the company, he'd systematically stripped it of assets before the sale, funneling millions into offshore accounts. "Oh, God," I whispered, my hands shaking. This was why he'd come back. He was covering his tracks, and I was the loose end. A knock at the door startled me. I hastily gathered the papers, shoving them back into the envelope. "Coming!" I opened the door to find Nancy standing there, looking decidedly less polished than the last time I'd seen her. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the house. "Please, come in," I muttered sarcastically, closing the door. "What do you want, Nancy?" She turned to face me, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. "I want the same thing you do, to take Jake down." I blinked, sure I'd misheard. "What?" Nancy sank onto my couch, suddenly looking exhausted. "Jake's been cheating on me with multiple women, and that's not even the worst of it." My mind reeled. "The company? You know about that?" She nodded grimly. "I found out last week. He's been embezzling for years, Alice, and now he's trying to pin it all on you." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "On me? How?" "He's claiming you were involved in the financial decisions before you left, that you knew about the offshore accounts." Nancy's eyes met mine. "He's setting you up to take the fall." A wave of nausea hit me. "But that's not true. I didn't know anything about it." "I believe you," Nancy said softly. "That's why I'm here. I want to help." I laughed bitterly. "Help? How could you possibly help?" She reached into her purse, pulling out a flash drive. "Because I have proof. Emails, bank statements, everything, but I can't use it without implicating myself. That's where you come in." My head spun with the implications. "You want me to turn him in?" Nancy nodded. "It's the only way, Alice. If we don't act first, he'll destroy us both." I sank into a chair, my mind racing. Could I trust her? This woman who'd married Jake, who'd looked at me with such disdain in the diner? As if reading my thoughts, Nancy leaned forward. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but think about your son, Alice. What kind of future will he have if Jake succeeds?" Ethan, my beautiful boy, sleeping peacefully in the next room. The thought of him growing up with Jake's shadow looming over us made my decision for me. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm in. What's the plan?" Nancy's relief was palpable. "We gather all the evidence, then go to the authorities. But we have to move fast. Jake's getting suspicious." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Jake. "We need to talk. Come to the house tonight, alone." I showed Nancy the message, my heart pounding. He knows something's up. She stood, suddenly all business. "This is our chance, Alice. Go to the meeting. Wear a wire. I'll be nearby with the evidence. If we can get him to confess." The enormity of what we were planning hit me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice, about securing a future for my son, about finally breaking free from Jake's influence once and for all. "All right," I said, squaring my shoulders. "Let's do this." As Nancy left to make preparations, I looked at the photo of Ethan on my mantel. His innocent smile steeled my resolve. Whatever happened tonight, I had to succeed, for both of us. I picked up my phone, my finger hovering over Jake's message. With a deep breath, I typed my response. "I'll be there." The die was cast. In a few hours, I'd be facing Jake one last time, and this time, I wouldn't be the one walking away with nothing. My heart pounded as I approached the house on Maple Street. The grand facade, once a symbol of my dreams, now loomed like a fortress of deceit. I touched the wire hidden beneath my blouse, drawing strength from Nancy's words. "Remember, we only need one confession." Jake opened the door before I could knock, his smile predatory. "Alice, darling, come in." I stepped inside, fighting the urge to flee. The house was immaculate, a stark contrast to the chaos about to unfold. "Drink," Jake offered, already pouring himself a whiskey. I shook my head. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Jake. Why am I here?" He chuckled, sinking into an armchair. "Always so direct. It's one of the things I admired about you, you know." "Cut the crap," I snapped, my nerves fraying. "What do you want?" Jake's eyes hardened. "I want you to sign some papers, a simple amendment to our divorce agreement. You'll relinquish any claim to the company's assets." I forced a laugh. "The company you sold without my knowledge? Why would I do that?" "Because," he leaned forward, voice low, "if you don't, I'll make sure you never see your precious son again." Ice flooded my veins. "You wouldn't dare." Jake's smile was cruel. "Wouldn't I? Think about it, Alice. Who would the courts favor? The successful businessman or the unstable single mother working in a diner?" Rage boiled inside me. You bastard, you set this all up, didn't you? The company, the move back here, it was all to corner me. He shrugged, unrepentant. Business is business. I couldn't let you be a loose end. And Nancy? I pressed, praying the wire was picking everything up. Does she know about your business practices? A flicker of unease crossed Jake's face. Nancy's not your concern. This is between us. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. No, Jake, this is bigger than us now. I know about the embezzlement, the offshore accounts. Did you really think you could hide it forever? Jake's composure cracked. He surged to his feet, looming over me. You don't know anything. And if you breathe a word of this to anyone, I'll... The door burst open, revealing Nancy and two stern-faced men in suits. That's enough, Jake, Nancy said, her voice ice-cold. It's over. Jake's face drained of color. Nancy, what the hell is this? One of the men stepped forward, flashing a badge. Jacob Thompson, we're with the FBI. We have some questions about your financial dealings. As the reality of the situation sank in, Jake's shock turned to fury. He lunged at me, eyes wild. You bitch, you set me up. I stumbled back, but before Jake could reach me, the agents had him pinned. As they read him his rights, Jake's gaze locked on mine, filled with a hatred that chilled me to the bone. This isn't over, Alice, he snarled. I'll destroy you for this, you and that brat of yours. As they led Jake away, my legs gave out. I sank to the floor, trembling. Nancy knelt beside me, her hand on my shoulder. It's done, she said softly. We did it. I nodded, unable to speak. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me hollow. We'd won, but at what cost? Outside, I could hear Jake still shouting threats as they put him in the car. Each word was a dagger, reminding me that this victory was far from clean. Nancy helped me to my feet. Come on, let's get you home to Ethan. Ethan, my beautiful boy, the reason for all of this. As we stepped outside, the cool night air hit my face, and with it came a crushing realization. Jake's words weren't empty threats. As long as he was alive, Ethan and I would never truly be safe. I turned to Nancy, my voice barely a whisper. What have we done? Her eyes met mine, filled with a mix of triumph and fear that mirrored my own. What we had to do, Alice. What we had to do. As we walked away from the house on Maple Street, I knew that while one chapter had closed, another, potentially more dangerous one, was just beginning. The showdown was over, but the war? It had only just begun. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I took the stand. Jake sat at the defense table, his once impeccable suit now rumpled, his eyes burning with hatred. As I swore to tell the truth, I caught Nancy's encouraging nod from the gallery. Mrs. Thompson, the prosecutor began, please tell the court about your ex-husband's financial activities during your marriage. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Jake, Mr. Thompson, systematically embezzled funds from our company, hiding millions in offshore accounts. Jake's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled him. As I continued my testimony, detailing years of financial abuse and manipulation, I watched Jake's facade crumble. His smug confidence gave way to panic, then fury. When it was the defense's turn for cross-examination, Jake's lawyer tried to paint me as a scorned woman out for revenge. But I held my ground, my voice steady as I recounted the emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the threats against our son. And why should the court believe you now? The lawyer sneered. I looked directly at Jake as I answered. Because I'm not afraid anymore. I have nothing left to lose and everything to gain by telling the truth. As I stepped down from the stand, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Whatever happened now, I'd done my part. The truth was out. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts. As the judge read out Jake's sentence, 15 years in federal prison, I watched the man who had once terrorized me crumble before my eyes. But it was Jake's final outburst that truly marked the end. As they led him away, he lunged towards me, spitting venom. This isn't over, Alice. I'll get out. And when I do... No, Jake, I interrupted, my voice calm. It is over. You have no power over me anymore. As the courtroom doors closed behind him, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to find Nancy, tears in her eyes. We did it, she whispered. I nodded, my own eyes welling up. We did. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements, but all I wanted was to get home to Ethan. As Nancy and I pushed through the crowd, I spotted a familiar face, Diane from the diner, beaming with pride. You did good, honey, she said, pulling me into a hug. Now, let's get you home to that boy of yours. The drive back to my parents' house was a blur. As we pulled up, I saw my mother on the porch, Ethan in her arms. The sight of my son, safe, loved, free from Jake's shadow, brought fresh tears to my eyes. I scooped Ethan into my arms, breathing in his sweet baby scent. "It's over, little one," I whispered. "We're safe now." As we gathered in the living room, my parents, Nancy, Diane, and Hank, who'd closed the diner to be here, I looked around at this unlikely family we'd formed. Each person had played a part in getting us to this moment. "I don't know how to thank you all," I began, my voice thick with emotion, but Diane cut me off with a wave of her hand. "You don't need to thank us, honey. You did this. You found the strength to stand up to him, to protect your boy. We're just glad we could help." Nancy nodded in agreement. "Alice, you gave me the courage to face the truth about Jake. If anyone should be thanking someone, it's me thanking you." As the evening wore on, filled with quiet celebration and plans for the future, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Jake was gone, but more importantly, the fear he'd instilled in me was gone too. Later, as I tucked Ethan into bed, I made him a promise. "You'll never have to be afraid, my love. Mommy will always protect you." Looking down at my sleeping son, I realized that this moment, this love, was what I'd been fighting for all along. Not revenge, not justice, but the chance to give Ethan the life and love he deserved. As I closed Ethan's door, I caught sight of my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me was stronger, wiser, and more whole than she'd ever been. For the first time in years, I smiled at my reflection. The past was behind us now. The future, bright, hopeful, and ours alone, was waiting.